alaikum, which means peace be upon you in Arabic, and that's the Muslim greeting. And also howdy, of course. Tonight is our Women in Islam discussion panel. And this discussion panel is designed to hopefully make y'all feel comfortable so that you can ask questions and gain a better understanding and perhaps an appreciation for women in Islam and why women in Islam choose to remain women in Islam. Tonight we have three wonderful speakers, and I will begin by introducing them and then kind of go over the question format. On the far end we have Nicole Queen. She is a Texas native who was raised as a Baptist and later became a celebrity and nightlife photographer. She left her chaotic lifestyle behind to pursue a more peaceful existence in Islam. Nicole's story has been featured in several documentaries, including Al Jazeera, Algeria TV, and BBC, with YouTube videos reaching 7 million hits. She is currently a certified speaker with the Islamic Speakers Bureau and speaks regularly at public schools, churches, universities, as well as Islamic events. Nicole also still maintains her wedding photography business and is happily married with 2 children. In the middle of our panel, we have Sister Rebecca Hankins, and she is an associate professor and certified archivist and librarian at Texas A&M University. Her research interests include the African diaspora, women and gender studies, diversity in academia, and Muslims and Islam in speculative fiction. She is author of articles on Black feminist writers, Islamic science fiction and fantasy, oral history, and library and archival practices and other topics. So tonight's format is going to kind of be very open, like I said. Feel free to ask any questions that you would like to our panelists. You can raise your hand, and if you prefer to be anonymous, some of you might have some index cards on your chairs, and otherwise we might have someone walking up and down with some index cards. So just kind of, gesture to them and they'll pass one to you so you can remain anonymous with your questions. I'll start off asking a few questions just to kind of get it. Oh, I'm so sorry. My list was. I'm so sorry. Dora, how could I forget her? I see her all the time. Dora Lopez has worked for the past 16 years for Workforce Solutions, Brazos Valley, as a quality assurance manager. She was born and raised in Bryan College Station and accepted Islam 8 years ago, and she's married with 5 children. And I'm very sorry about that, Dora. All right, so I'll go ahead and ask the first question to get things going, but again, you can start asking questions right away. So my first question is just kind of to understand a little bit more about why y'all are Muslims. Why did you choose to be Islam other than, as opposed to other religions? And in this question, I want y'all all to answer because we want to know y'all, but for the other questions, if you feel that someone completely answers the question, then you don't have to bother yourselves too much. So please go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll start. Can you guys hear me pretty well in the back? We're not mic'd, so everybody hears? All right, awesome. Why did I choose Islam? If I had a crazy lifestyle, why did Islam give me peace instead of Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism? Supposed to be pretty peaceful. I found Islam because God basically, in that point in my life, put people in front of me at just the right moment where I was kind of hitting the rock bottom, as the saying goes, and was looking for answers in my life and wanted more of a purpose. I lived a kind of a chaotic lifestyle. Like I took pictures in a lot of nightclubs in Dallas, and so that was my job, was to go to parties. So I would get home at 4 in the morning and start my day at noon. Some of you may be able to relate to that. So I met people at the moments where I was really wanting to stop living this way, and I wanted to stop drinking and stop being crazy. And the people that I met that I saw had a more disciplined lifestyle were usually Muslim people. And I would meet them and just feel like, well, what makes you so good that you don't need to drink, you don't need to party? And they would talk to me about their religion, and I was told about some videos on YouTube, and so I started watching videos of people who had a similar story to mine, and they said that they had found Islam and that it had changed their life. And all of those questions I had and those things that I was yearning for, like a peaceful existence or feeling every day like you wake up with a purpose, That was what these people had been looking for too, and they're saying that they found it in this religion, Islam. So I started studying, going to classes like at the masjid and watching more videos, and then I became crazy and was like ordering books on Amazon and staying up all night reading. Thank you for the applause. But I think I was just at the right moment in my life where if I was going to become anything and something so distant like being a Muslim compared to what I had grown up being, which was a Baptist, that really showed me that God reaches out to you, and I believe that there are a lot of different paths to God, and this was just the path for me. This is what worked for me and what gave me the disciplined lifestyle that I was looking for.
Okay. If my voice starts going down, let me know. I won't say how long I've been Muslim, because it's been, let's just say it's longer than I've been non-Muslim. But I grew up in Michigan, in Detroit area. I was raised in Pontiac, which is a small town outside of Detroit. And there was a large Muslim community in Detroit, has always been a large Muslim community in Detroit. There was a large African American Muslim community in Detroit. They were not affiliated, which is what everybody seems to think, that all African American Muslims are affiliated with the nation. Well, these people weren't. They were all Sunni Muslims. And my sister became Muslim first, joined that community, and we used to talk, and there was a really core group of women within that community who were teachers, who were educators, who were students, who were doing some really dynamic things. And so I started talking with them. We would have conversation, and I never was a joiner, didn't join religions, didn't join groups, but I really liked this community of sisterhood. And I really liked how sisterhood was portrayed in Islam, was felt in Islam. And so I became Muslim in Detroit, and I've been Muslim for, let's say, close to 40 years. So.
Okay. When I talk about my conversion, I hope that I don't offend anybody with anything that I'm saying, so please forgive me in advance. But I was raised as a Catholic, and as a child there were some questions that I would pose to my parents that I never really could get answers to. And even I had an uncle that was the deacon of the church, and some of those questions that I would pose were, you know, why do we light the candle for this certain saint, you know, whenever we are ill, or we need some type of, we need to seek protection, you know, why do we have to confess our sins to the Father of the church? And, you know, I felt like I wanted a direct connection with God. Why do I need these mediators, you know, involved? And when I grew older and had children, my husband and I could never agree. He was a Baptist, I was a Catholic, and we never could agree on how we were going to raise our children. And so there was no religion with our children. And so there was a lot of conflict that I could see that my children were facing. And we later divorced, and as I became a single mother, I went back to that question that I had and noticed that my children needed some discipline, they needed some focus, they needed some direction to take their lives, and I felt like the best way to do that was to establish a religion for us. So I began a search. We went to a Mormon church. You know, I had some individuals that visited my home. We went there for 6 months. I went to a friend of mine's church for some time, but I didn't feel at home with any of those. There were, again, questions that I was still facing, that I had a conflict with that I just didn't agree with. And when I was introduced to a Muslim, I was given the Quran. We had many questions, some debates, but we had many questions, and I was given some information to read. When I picked up that Quran and I read the English translation, I finished it in 4 days, along with work and school and the kids. I finished it so quickly because I saw that there was a whole chapter devoted to women and our rights as women. And there were more instances of the mention of the Virgin Mary in the Quran than were in the Bible. There were 23 prophets that the Bible shared and that the Quran shared. And I couldn't see the bad that was being portrayed in the media. So I did more research and I listened to more lectures. And it wasn't an overnight thing. I think that some of the people that were around when I accepted Islam, I went to the masjid for 6 months before I decided, and I took my children with me. And as a family, we decided that this is the right decision for us. So we all converted. We all converted, and a few years later, I felt like there is something that I can give them a woman's perspective, and I can give them, you know, some information about Islam, and I can teach them as I'm learning, but there was a void that we also needed to fill. And so I got married, and that was about maybe 3 or 4 years into my conversion. Got married, and so now my husband is there as also as an influence and to teach us what he knew. And even now, we have conversations that consist of, he couldn't tell me the why they do certain things, and I could as a convert because I had to research it and I had to understand it to be able to explain to my children. So he's teaching me some things, and I'm also able to teach him some things, and the children are getting the benefit from that.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you introduce yourselves one more time? Yeah, just make sure I get the name.
I'm Dora Lopez.
And I'm Rebecca Hankins.
I'm Nicole Queen.
Can you please spell your last name?
Hankins.
Yes, Katie.
I have a question. How many of you speak Arabic or read Arabic, or do you just read the English translation of the Quran and the Hadith?
I'm married to an Arab, so I am a little more fluent than I was before. That's for sure. And I can read some of the Quran, but then I have to go and translate it into English. So usually I'll read it in English because in the end you're just translating something.
I can read and write Arabic. My speaking is not great.
And much like with the Bible, we don't speak Hebrew or we don't speak Greek. So it is not this spoken Arabic that we would communicate with, but I am able to read. I can't write very well in Arabic right now. In a lot of ways, I'm still a baby Muslim, still consider myself a baby Muslim. But we learn audioly, through audio, memorizing the Quran, and I still have to refer back to the English translation.
Thank you for the question. Yes?
I guess this is one for all of y'all because you all went through changes where like the people around you in your community had to accept your change. So it would be maybe what did you see from others when you decided to convert or take on your new religion?
Are you asking how did other people treat us when we converted?
Yeah, or like what was their take on it, or like the outsider perspective that you saw?
Okay, and do you mean people who were in our life before Islam, or do you mean
Just
new people afterwards?
People who were in your life before,
Okay.
good or bad, it doesn't matter.
My parents took it like, I don't even, is this working? Okay. My parents took it in not a very good way. It took them a year to kind of come around to have a more steady relationship with me. That was a year of me not giving up on calling and trying to talk to my parents and get them more used to what I had done. Actually, after they met my husband, I got married a year after I became a Muslim. And after they met him and saw that I was still crazy and still, you know, still me, and that I was happy, then they accepted everything after that. So it was more of just people who saw that I was a Muslim who were afraid and didn't really understand what I had done. They acted silly, and then after they got to know me and got to see that everything is safe and that I'm fine, then they were very happy, because they also noticed these positive changes in my life, that I, you know, had stopped being what I considered a bad person.
Well, I always tell the story of my mom. She really strangely became more religious as a Christian, and I think she was fine with my decision because I wasn't raised in a very religious household. So after I converted to Islam.
Sorry, Sister Hankins, can you try to speak a little more?
Oh,
You have to get right up.
after I converted to Islam, my mom was, she wasn't very happy about it. My dad was, his ideas about it was, he thought it was something good. He was not religious, so I wasn't raised in a very religious household. But a few years after I converted, my mom became very religious in her faith, her Christian faith, and we never had any blowouts about it or anything. And most of my friends in Detroit, there's such a large Muslim community, so people it was just natural to see individuals who were of different faiths. And so Islam wasn't anything strange or different. And plus back then, you heard the Nation was around, Malcolm X. So people were looking at Islam in a very, very different light. So I didn't really have any backlash or any of that from my family and friends.
Yeah, myself as well. I didn't have a lot of backlash from my family. They had questions, and once I was able to show them the common areas, then they weren't completely gonna convert with me, but they could accept it. Now, I did have a close friend who I thought was a very close friend, that she never brought religion up in our relationship, and she never once invited me to her church. But the moment that I told her that I was thinking about accepting Islam, she was brought to tears, and she, you gotta come to my church, you gotta come to my church. And I catered to that. I welcomed the invitation. I took my children, and we were already, I think, going to the masjid like maybe 2 months. And it was already starting to settle in. I got closer to God, Allah, at this time, because we went to the church, and it was during, I believe, like Christmas time, so they were having a function there, and they were singing, and they were doing a lot of things that my children started to ask me questions. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? And I immediately felt in my heart, why am I here? I came because she asked me to come, and I wanted to rule this out as so I can move forward. And whenever they started, singing and doing some things, I told her that I couldn't stay, and I was gonna have to leave. And probably a short period after that, I think that we remained Facebook friends, but that's about it, because we have the differences. And it's not something that I regret, but I have developed, or I have acquired multitude of friends, because we have women that in our masjid, like Sister Rebecca Hankins mentioned, are the sisterhood that we have. We have a very close bond. You will see when someone is sick, someone's coming with some chicken soup. When somebody's in need, they need a ride, there's somebody there. Even during our Friday prayer, someone's car gets towed, everyone is pitching in to pay that fee before they leave for prayer. I mean, it's amazing, the sisterhood or the brotherhood that is among us that I haven't seen anywhere. And two, one thing I didn't mention before is that in any mosque that I have been to, it's all the same. The procedures are the same. What we do is the same. But when I was shopping around, I guess, for different churches, I had to learn how that church operated and how this church operated, and that was something that I also had trouble with, because you kind of feel insecure. Everybody's doing the same thing, and you don't quite know, what to do. But wherever I'm at, whatever part of the United States or overseas that I may go, I've had the chance to go to different massages in Dubai and London, and it's all the same. So I always feel at home in any mosque that I walk into.
Thank you. Before I call on you, I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions that you don't want anyone to know that you're the person asking, please feel free to use the index cards that might be on your chair, and if you don't want to have one, raise your hand and hopefully someone will bring one by for you. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi. In American society, we were talking about your conversion to Islam and just the possibility of there being a backlash from friends and family. And I was just wondering, what is in an American society, what is the most common stigma that you have to overcome? Telling people that, or obviously it's obvious that you're Islam, but what is the most common stigma that you have to overcome? Like, what's the misconception about it?
Well, I'll take a stab at that one. I get, in fact, I have conversations at work quite regularly, probably not the best practice, but it comes up when they see me praying, and they know that I have to take time out to pray. So the questions come up when we get a new employee. What is she doing back there? So some of the things that I see is that having to explain that Allah is the Arabic word for God, that it's not a separate God, it's not a statue or an idol. Allah is our God, and it's the same God that you worship also. That's one of the stigma that I have to explain. The other thing is about women particularly, not to say that I have to ask permission to do this or do that, but there's stigma that I have to report to and get permission from my husband. But in Islam, or even in Christianity, Adam came first, and Eve was born out of Adam's rib. So there is a role for Adam, and there is a role for Eve, and so Eve is the I would say more gentle. She had to be cared for in a different way. So that's what I have to always explain, is that men and women aren't necessarily built equally, so we all have our different roles. I mean, I work, I do things. It's not like I have to be home, I'm suppressed. It's not like that. But I do have to explain that physically, agility-wise, God did make us differently, and there are certain things that I cannot do that my husband can. He can't give birth to a child, I can. So there's different roles for us that we all have to understand what our limitations are.
I guess for me, some of the stereotypes are similar to what Dora said, but I think it's interesting for African American Muslims. I go into the classes on campus here, and I talk to the students. Sometimes I come and talk about who I am and what I do here. And one of the first things I ask the class is, how many of you, if we said Muslim, would think of an African American? And it never fails. Most people don't think of African Americans as Muslim in the same way that they see an Arab or a South Asian. And so that's probably the biggest hurdle I have to overcome, is this notion that African Americans are all converts to Islam, or that African Americans don't know their Islam. So that's a real serious problem that I face in going and talking to people, and just it's not just non-Muslims, but I have the same issue with Muslims. This whole notion that we are, if you're African American, that you're not Muslim. And the interesting thing about Islam is you have more people of color, you have more Africans who are Muslim than you have Arabs. You have more Arabic-speaking Africans than you have Arabic-speaking Arabs. So it's this whole idea that Africans or African Americans are not, you know, authentic Muslims. So that's probably the biggest hurdle, I think.
That's really good. I've never actually thought about that, but you're right. For me, this mic is really not good. All of them have excellent stigmas that they've overcome. For me, one thing that I would have to say is that I hated the idea that if I wore the hijab, that all of a sudden I wasn't a white American girl anymore, because that is what I am. I'm Caucasian American. I come from a southern country upbringing, and you know, I was never used to being looked at as a minority, and so I hated dealing with that stigma, like that I'm some minority just because I chose to dress modestly, that means that I'm a foreigner or that I'm not from here. I love talking to people, you know, who assume that I'm Middle Eastern when they see me, because I don't know, maybe I don't look Caucasian with my scarf, and I love talking to them and they hear my exotic accent. And then they look at me like, well, where are you from? And I'll say, well, I'm from here. I'm from Dallas, you know. Well, where are your parents from? And I'm like, well, they're from the Louisiana area, you know. And you know, you want to know what parish? Like, I love it, but then I hate it. I'm not a foreigner. Don't look at me like I'm a foreigner, which is always not a good thing, because Americans treat foreigners in a bad way. So I learned what it's like to be a minority. It taught me a lot more respect for people who were born minorities, and it taught me how much they've overcome challenges where things are not so easy for them. How much now that I am this way, I've faced challenges that I wouldn't have faced if I had been just an attractive girl standing in front of that person. So I think the stigma is one that definitely needs to be changed, that if you have on a scarf, that means that you're not an American. Everybody in this room, you go into school here, you're an American, you know. So I'd like to see that change, definitely before my daughter grows up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
How many of you have gone to Mecca, and if you have, how did it make you feel?
Just to make sure the question was heard, how many of you have gone to Mecca, and if you have, how did it make you feel?
I've never been. I had an opportunity when I was in Jordan in 2012, but I wasn't able to go, but definitely would like to do so.
I never had the opportunity. We do plan on doing that. It's every Muslim's one of our articles of faith that we do complete Hajj, and whether it's an Umrah or Hajj, my family is looking forward to that. We have a small 2-year-old. My children range from 2 to age 19. So right now, we're waiting for the 2-year-old to get a little bit older before we can make that plan.
think we're all in the same boat. I've been over to Jordan and the surrounding areas 3 or 4 times, but my husband has been to Mecca, and when he came back, there was like, he was glowing. So I can't wait to go and have that experience, and I'm sure I'll embarrass myself and cry the whole time, but it's something I think that every Muslim, especially a convert, to us it's like going to Hollywood or something. Like it's Mecca, you know. So we're all excited to go there.
I'm not certain if everyone knows what Mecca is, or you know what goes on there. Would any of you like to kind of just elaborate briefly what it is and why it's something so important to Muslims?
Shake up the group.
Well, as Dora was saying, it's one of the 5 pillars, one of the foundational beliefs that Muslims have to believe and inculcate in themselves, that everybody has to make Hajj once in their lifetime. And so you go to Saudi Arabia, where Mecca and Medina are, and the exercise itself, what you're doing there is similar to what who we call Prophet Ibrahim did. It's the same, some of the same activities that he did when he was there, and so we're following in his footsteps and doing some of the same types of activities. And so it's something that we all have to do. Every able-bodied Muslim, male and female. And that's the interesting thing about the Hajj, is because when you're there, you are like everybody else. So you have to wear this one piece of cloth, that white cloth that everybody puts on. So regardless of whether you're a millionaire or you're impoverished, you all look the same. So you don't know who has status, you don't know who has wealth. And so it's a way of making you all humble to this exercise that you have to do. And it's pretty grueling. So you have to, you know, have a health. You have to be in good shape to do it as best you can. But it definitely is something that we all look forward to doing, and it's one of our pillars. It's one of the things that is held up for us.
Thank you for that explanation. I think
let me add on to that. My mother-in-law, she completed Umrah, which is, I don't want to say mini Hajj, but she did visit Mecca a few months past. And I have muscular dystrophy, so I wear braces on my legs, and so long distances can be somewhat difficult. So she's warned me, you're going to have to build up to this. This is something that you're going to have to prepare for, both mentally and spiritually.
Yeah, let me say, because one of the things that you have to do is you have to stand all day and do prayer. So you definitely have to be in shape. A lot of walking, and this is the largest gathering of people in the world. So you have 3, 4, 5 million people who are there trying to do the very same thing that you are trying to do in a limited amount of space. So it's definitely something that you need to be in as good of shape as possible. And but there are people there. There's individuals to help you. So it can be very difficult, but that is something that, you know, we understand.
And here's me trying to find the common ground again. You know, the story of Prophet Abraham and Hajj, whenever she was in the desert and she had her son there who didn't have food or water, and she cried out to God, and she said, you know, for God to save her, and out gushed a spring. And that spring, we visit that, it's called the Well of Zamzam, and that well is still there, it's still preserved for us to drink that water. So we have so many commonalities that you may not know, that we recognize these same prophets, and these places that are in the Bible. We share all of those events, and that is one of the reasons why we visit Mecca, is that's where this all took place.
Thank you for that. I believe she had a question. Yes.
I was just wondering, in regards to your children, like how you're raising them religiously, and since you found peace by converting to another religion, would you guys be open to the idea of them finding peace in another religion, or how would you deal with that situation?
You hit home right there.
Did everyone hear the question? Okay, her question was, you found peace converting to another religion. Would you have any issues with your children also, finding peace in another religion?
My 5 children, again, they range from ages 2 to 19. My younger children, we teach Sunday school, so they help me come and teach other children in our Al-Huda school on Sundays. My oldest child has stepped out of Islam, and I pray that this is just a phase she's going through. The religion cannot be forced. We cannot force her to pray. We cannot force her to accept Islam. So it's her choice if she doesn't want to do this. I know that the school that she was going to, she was the only Muslim there. She did not have a very good support network. She was the oldest child, so when it got to high school, there was prom and all these things, and she missed her quinceañera and our Hispanic culture, different things that she wanted to participate in. So I feel that she felt Islam where there were a lot of rules, and it was too many things she can't do, and there was a lot of restrictions, and so I have to accept that, but I can just make dua. I can supplicate to God that she understand that we still pray to one God. I don't think she's found a religion that she's comfortable with, but I just think that it was overwhelming for her when she grew older and she had so many different conflicts between her friends doing other things and that were fun, and that she couldn't do that. But again, I make prayer that she will eventually accept and learn that this is the true religion that we follow, and that there are consequences, for our actions, because I can't make decisions for her. She has to make her own decisions.
I have a similar situation with my children too, and you want your kids to believe like you believe, but again, you can't force them. So what you do is you try to be an example, and that's what I do. I try to be an example of a Muslim woman who is struggling to do the right things, but trying, to stay true and stay on the path. So that's the best that I can do. If they decide that they want to do other than that, I'm still their mother. We still talk. I still love them. And so I first and foremost want to be the good example for them.
I think for me, I count my blessings every day, and I feel really thankful that I became a Muslim before I had children. And so I feel like you have a little more ease in expecting that they will follow in your footsteps if they're born this way. Like if inshallah, God willing, if I put my daughter in an Islamic school, then maybe she won't face these issues like prom, which is hard, and I don't want to dangle these things in front of her and say, here's everything, but you can't have it. These things are hard for kids. They don't look at the religion the same way we do. They didn't choose to be this way. They're born into it. So I hope to give them the Islamic education that my husband can give them, whereas he's born this way. And then I hope that they'll look at Islam with the passion that a convert looks at Islam, where we're grateful to be this way. And this is the best that I can do for them. But I am thankful, because I know it's hard if you have kids and then you convert to Islam. If they grew up a certain way and then they change over to this religion, that's even harder for them to stick with it. So I always give a lot of respect to the kids who do after that, who stick with Islam. I think everybody, you want your kids to be what you are. I'm sure it was hard for my family when I converted, if they thought this was some strange religion or that I was worshiping a different God or something like that. So I would imagine, and I would feel also afraid if my kids wanted to change, and I would do everything I could to help them make an educated decision. But my goal is just to raise them to believe that this is a great way to live, and that this is the right way. So that's the best that you can do, and for your own kids, you'll feel the same way.
Yes.
I know many people would argue that religion suppresses women. I can tell from a lot of the comments y'all said that y'all don't believe that Islam does this. From what I understand of the teachings, I see that they preach to have that men and women are equal in the Islamic religion, if I interpret that correctly. So what do you say to those people who don't know that much about the religion itself and what the texts say? How do you argue to them, like, or do you think an Islam woman can call herself a feminist under her definition of feminism?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because I do, and I have this T-shirt that says, "This is what a Muslim woman feminist looks like." And I say that because we have a definition in our mind of what a feminist is.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it doesn't look like me, just in the same way that being a Muslim doesn't look like me. So you're constantly fighting against these stereotypes, and you're fighting against what, people are saying is, this is what you are supposed to be if you're a feminist, this is what you're supposed to be if you're Muslim. So I see it as a challenge, always. It's always interesting to me when I walk into a room after someone is, after I've done something for someone, or after they didn't know who I was and then they see me. And so I'm constantly battling this whole notion of what a Muslim is, especially a Muslim woman. So it's not about really arguing with people, because if you already have something in your mind of what a feminist looks like or who a feminist is, I can't change that. All I can do is do what I do, and that's who I am.
Just to add, if y'all could make sure that you speak into the mics a little more. I don't know if everyone in the back is loud enough.
Well, going back to the stigma, is I'm always trying to find the common ground, or maybe in a way that would make them laugh, so they could feel a little more comfortable talking about it. So one of the things I mentioned is the rights that we have that you don't really see practiced even in American culture. One of those things is that if I work, that's my money in Islam. And if my husband works, he has to take care of the bills, and that's our money. And you don't see that a lot in American culture. You see, why'd you make that transaction? They see each other's account, or they have separate accounts. They hide it from each other. And in Islam, it's said even in the Quran that the woman's money is her money. If she chooses to contribute to the household, she may, but she can't be forced to do that. So those are one of the rights that a woman has. She has a right to be educated. In fact, it's almost pressed upon that she has to be educated because she has the primary role with the children. So in our masjid, I see a lot of PhDs and masters, and you name it, they have it. If I need to talk to one person for advice, I've got a collection of it. And that's one thing I have to find, that if we were oppressed, you wouldn't see education, you wouldn't see some of the rights that even some of the American cultures, they don't have.
The only thing that I'll add to that is that in Islam, women have multiple rights in Islam. If you go to some of the countries where Islam is a pretty dominant religion, women in other countries sometimes don't have the rights that Islam gives them. Okay, Islam gave women rights to their own property, to have jobs, to be leaders from before the U.S. ever let a woman speak for herself or vote. Islam gave a woman a right to vote thousands of years ago. It gave women the right to live when infant female babies were being buried alive by pagans and stuff. God said, not the Muslims. You're not going to bury your daughters, and shame on you if you find out you have a daughter and you're not happy. So women are very protected in Islam, but it doesn't matter in some countries, or in some, you know, you have to look at the educational background of that woman. How much money does her family have? Where does she live? What are the, you know, what is the economic status of the country she lives in? Is there a dictator? You know, all of these things come into play when you look and you watch videos and you say, well, those women are Muslim and they don't have these kind of rights and they're being oppressed. They're not being oppressed because of Islam.
Can I have a question to add on to that, from what y'all said? Can you name or list off a specific female in Islam that you find in particular as a role model, or anything?
I want to say something and I'll pass it to you guys, because there's a woman that I love to read about, and she was like a ninja. Okay, that's how I describe her. She's Umara, I think that's how you pronounce it, but her name was Nusayba. Okay, she was an amazing woman, and I love her story. I love the way she's described, but she's a mother, she's a wife, and she was an educated woman. She used to teach, and then she gets kind of thrown into these battles where everyone is just trying to help, you know, so the people around the Prophet are in battles, fighting for the right to worship freely, okay, and fighting for their right to exist. And she is on the battlefield, and just the Prophet, I think, was left alone, or he wasn't really, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was left alone on a battlefield. The men had gone off, they weren't supposed to, and they had gone off, like they thought they had won the battle, and so they're running to go and try to go after the other men. And they left him pretty exposed to where all these other men that are still there would love to kill him. And she comes running with her sword, and the Prophet, you know, I always get goosebumps and I almost cry when I talk about it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, describes her as that her sword was swinging to the left of me, to the right of me, all around me. I see the sword of Nusayba, because she was all over, and she's getting stabbed multiple times, and she just keeps swinging, and she's like a ninja. Like, she is a force to be reckoned with. And she fought in many battles and watched her sons die in battle. And, you know, she's just this powerhouse of a woman, not someone just stirring a pot in a cave or something, the way people imagine Muslim women in the time of the Prophet. She's out there with a sword taking names. And so this is my most favorite inspirational woman in Islam, because I'm like, she's everything that you don't expect a Muslim woman to be.
I would have to totally agree with that. In fact, we covered that in
She's so
Sunday school too.
If you're talking about contemporary women, I'm a real fan of science fiction and fantasy, so there are a couple of really great women writers, like G. Willow Wilson and Pamela Taylor. And then there's some scholars, Amina McLeod, who is a professor at Purdue. She has developed an archives on Muslims in America, plus she's an amazing scholar. So there's a lot of contemporary women who are doing amazing things. Ingrid Mattson, who was the first female president of the Islamic Society of North America.
Elected as
yeah,
the
twice. So there are a lot of contemporary women that we can look at and really, you know, have some inspiration too.
All right. Kind of running out of time here. I have one question on a card here that seems kind of relevant to what her first question was, and then we'll take one more question after that. So the card says, there's this young Islamic girl who recently was shot by extremist group the Taliban for her advocacy of education. Can someone speak upon this incident and and why there is a tension between her and the Taliban.
I think it's that about it. Yeah, I think we're all, it's like global news there is, that's not something that we agree with, but the people who are following that are not following Islam. They're not educated to know that oppressing her in such a way or forbidding her from getting an education is wrong. A lot of them are recruited psychologically. You know, you feed into any oppressor or any abuser feeds into someone's needs. And so if there's a lack of food, lack of money, somehow they feed in that and they convince that person that they are right and that we are wrong. I'm saying we as like Americans are wrong. Or in this case, this young girl who was trying to get an education. I think even I saw on the CNN footage that was following the story at the time, more of a documentary type movie that I saw. You see that, you know, her father was in charge of the school, and she had a dream to become a doctor when she was older. So again, it's not something that is correct in any way. It's not something that is said in the Quran. It's just unfortunate that there are people out there like this who lack that education and feed upon the weaknesses of others.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the crux of it, is that it's a lack of education, a lack of knowledge even about their own faith. I also remember watching a documentary they were talking about. It was a couple of women who went to Afghanistan. And one of the women was interviewing some of the young men. And she asked them, she said, well, do you read Quran? Many of these people are they're illiterate. And so they rely on some elder to tell them their own faith, rather than reading themselves and learning themselves. And so you have a conversion of a lot of problems, lack of education, lack of food and housing. You just have all of these things that are, and a constant violent surroundings. So you have all of these things happening at one time, and they're not knowledgeable themselves. So, which Islam encourages you, you have to be educated. And this is really important to understand. Education is something that is for women and men. And there are so many young men who are relying on someone else to tell them what their faith is.
You see, even you would see this here. You would think that, you know, this is happening in other countries, but when I was growing up, you know, in Waco, you had the David Koresh. You know, you had someone who here who was educated or the women that grew up in the Waco area, you know, gave in to someone like that. And there's numerous stories across the United States where it's just somebody who feeds on their psychological need, and they're able to steer those people into a different direction. It's just as easily can happen here.
All right, we'll go ahead and take one last question. Anyone has one? Yes?
Few of you in the beginning, when you were talking about your conversion, spoke to the discipline that was in the Quran to be found in Islam. I was wondering just kind of how that discipline and how just Islam in general affects your daily lives.
For one, I was not a morning person in my past. Waking up for my morning prayer, Fajr, takes a lot of discipline. You know, I have to fight internally. We call those nafs. That's your internal jihad. That's the correct term for what jihad means. So waking up in the morning and cleansing myself and praying, or even during the month of Ramadan, you know, the discipline of fasting from until sundown, and restraining from food, restraining from water. I mean, not even gum. Nothing can touch our mouth. and having to be in full worship, you know, during that time. There's a lot of things in the Quran, like how you handle money, how you know, if you're borrowing money, that's all laid out for us. How you get married is laid out for us. You know, who you take as a partner. When someone dies, how is the money distributed? I mean, there's rules for everything there, and it's really black and white. So there's a lot of references of how you raise your children. You know, when they misbehave, what are you supposed to do? You're not supposed to strike them. You know, things like that. I'm trying to think of what other disciplines that we would acquire. Backbiting, not to talk behind someone's back, not to you know, speak ugly of them when they're not, you know, present.
It's the biggest jihad for
yeah, I mean,
especially for the ladies. It's the biggest struggle.
There's a lot of you know, discipline involved there.
You were asking how are those disciplines part of our lives? Personally, for me, before I found Islam, I dressed every day as to what I thought was going to get me further with people, and I was only worried about vanity and, like, do I look hot enough, you know, to get this job at this club, and do I, you know, all of those things were my main concern. And now when I look back, I'm like, I was such a fool, and I was so wrapped up in what we call the dunya, like the worldly things, you know, like so concerned about where I was buying my shoes and my clothes and all of the, you know, like, do I look fashionable enough? And the people that I was around were the same way. And girls went beyond just if you're naturally beautiful. Like, everyone I was around had Botox, silicone. They had their lips done. Everything was fake. They had extensions in their hair. Like, no one bothers to grow their hair. They just go buy it, you know. So I lived in a crazy kind of environment, and it was so fast-paced. And when I look at my life now, when I get dressed for God. You know, like, I want to be modest, and I cover my body for God instead of, like, oh, what is going to be more attractive to a man. When I eat, we eat a halal diet at my house, and that's like similar to like a Jewish person eating kosher. We only eat halal meat. Like, if I want to have a burger, I can't just roll up to In-N-Out, or y'all, I don't know if y'all have that here, Chick-fil-A, whatever, and grab something. Like, if I want something from a drive-thru, it's like a fish sandwich, or, you know, just give me nothing. Never mind, you don't have fish, I'm leaving. You know, I've done that so many times. Why don't you have fish? So, from eating to dressing to, like she said, what time you wake up in the morning, you start your day praying to God. A Muslim's life is completely centered around God. And we don't even really realize it sometimes, but the friends that you hang out with, like, your faith is pretty much 80% your environment. If I hung out with my old friends who all they talked about was whatever they did last night, am I going to keep putting my scarf on every day and being like, I love God, you know? No, I wouldn't fit in, and I wouldn't want to keep loving God. I would want to start living for the world. So for a Muslim, we're able to do this because we make our environment conducive to this kind of lifestyle. We hang out with people that live the same way. So friends, food, clothing, all of these things is part of that discipline. But it doesn't feel like discipline, I guess, compared to the rest of the world where you look disciplined, but for us it's like purpose. You know, everything I do has a purpose now.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for coming out in this really cold weather. We really appreciate it. Just to kind of, a few announcements here. This panel discussion was part of a series of events that are going on this semester for the Islam Awareness Initiative, which is just to raise awareness about Islam and hopefully give you guys the opportunity to understand Muslims more, and Muslims in America as well. So the upcoming event will be February 26th, and it's called Islamic Empires, and it is an exhibition where you can get a taste of various ethnic foods from multiple countries, and also learn about some of the influences that the Islamic Empire had on certain cultures. And the event that follows is spoken word poetry on February the 27th, and that's going to be about the Prophet Muhammad, who Muslims believe to be the last messenger of God. And if you have any interest in learning more, you can just look on the Muslim Student Association website. And with that, I'd like to conclude with one verse from the Quran that kind of highlights the relationship of men and women in Islam in God's eyes. It says, "For men and women who are devoted to God, believing men and women, obedient men and women, truthful men and women, steadfast men and women, humble men and women, charitable men and women, fasting men and women, chaste men and women who remember God often. God has prepared forgiveness and a rich reward." That's Quran chapter 33, verse 35. Thank you again for coming out. There should be surveys on your chairs. We really appreciate your feedback, and hopefully there are still some refreshments in the back, so please help yourself.